Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, men and women, non-conformers and non-believers, gender X and gender equals, welcome to Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast. My name is Damien B Donnelly and I am delighted to be offering you 2 new episodes in the space of less than 3 days. With today's episode and then another coming this Monday to celebrate Valentine's or not. An episode that will be available on Monday from 8 p.m. on your preferred podcast platform, where poets will be reading love poems, breakup poems, love poems about inanimate objects, cities, and of course, goldfish. Today on Eat the Storms, whether you are joining us on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Radio Public, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, or iTunes, we have 5 fantastic poets to introduce you to. One is a familiar favourite already to the show, and then 4 more shining stars of the poetry community. As usual, for details on all of my guests, you can head on over to www.eatthestorms.com, and there you'll find a podcast section with a blog post for every episode with details of how to find the guest, follow them on social media, how to explore their website, and perhaps how to buy their collections. So fasten your seatbelt, lay back into the comfort of your armchair, put your feet up and make sure your hand is very close to something to nibble and something to sip. This is Eat the Storms, and I hope you enjoy the show. My first guest today on Eat the Storms is a welcomed returning guest and will share with us poems from his incredible debut pamphlet Spectrum of Flight, which, as a former child of years of ceaseless bullying, this collection made a truly lasting impression on me when Animal Heart Press published it in 2020. Today, this Welsh poet will also share poems from his upcoming collection Dawn's Incision, arriving soon from Iceflow Press. He is a Best of the Net nominee and has been featured in over 50 journals. This is the brilliant David Hanlon.
Hello everyone, my name is David Hanlon and I'm a Welsh poet living in Cardiff. I'd like to say a big thank you to Damien for inviting me to feature on his brilliant podcast once again. I'm really looking forward to hearing all the other poets involved. I'd like to start by reading a couple of poems from my debut collection, Spectrum of Flight, which was published with Animal Heart Press and released in February 2020. The first poem I'm going to read you was originally published with the magazine Boston Accent Lit, and it's titled Phoenix. Eventually, I capture the light of recovery in my hands, and, tightly cupped, I transport it to him, ready to spill its shine down his throat. I wanted to do the same for him as it has done for me. But when I arrive, he is lip-stitched, and I realise I can't force him to open his mouth and let us in. I look down at my hands, feel ashes fall through my fingers, from which, one day, he will rise. Thank you. The second poem I'm going to read is called Revive Yourself. When you were a child who ran towards everything, wildebeest charging through African plains, did you ever think that the life vest orange sun, nourishing, yolk, setting on the skyline, was a place you could reach, that you could stand, ground dug up by unfettered feet, halted at that line where earth encounters sky, eyes shaken snow globes, polished into perspective-cut jewels, mouth heedless squawk, muted, thriven into a disclosing sunflower, head to the sky, an attending ear, light seconds away from unswerving heat, tattooed on your eyes, fueled in your stomach, and not be burned, as if wearing a superhero's heat-resistant costume, except for the scorch of wisdom turning callow to cinders. Remember when the things you couldn't do still seemed possible. Remember. Thank you very much. I'd like to finish with a couple of poems from my forthcoming collection, Dawn's Incision, which will be released this year with Iceflow Press. The first poem I'm going to read was originally published with 8 poems, and it's called Pan-frying. Knuckled into the roomy kitchen, lid-heavy eyes macerate in my gossamer memory. The cheap red wall clock is the midday sun. Towers, seethes. I forgot to buy milk again. I forgot to buy cereal again. I release an end slice of bread, all that's left suffocating in excess thin plastic. Relinquish it into the 2-slot toaster. Still, pop-up shock. Inclined over the cooker, narrow wooden spatula in hand, I hockey shriveled, sliced, closed-cup mushrooms in a black hole pan. Press down rubbery flesh, sizzle, squeak, push earplug soft flesh up against the half-pipe steel edge for too long. I sift through most days like this, trail prolonged coastlines, worn feet carry my mentality, peer out at the pan-round sun, retreating behind the juncture. Listen to quick-turn cars on quiet roads, tire screech against gravel. Wherever one thing meets another. The last poem I'd like to finish with was originally published with Feral Poetry Journal, and it's titled Moving Still. First, the jolt, slaps of memory stacked like sweetless pancakes, day trips, glacier night touches, your parting lips, closing. Did we allow love to tip us into its cavern, stir a cocktail with our fervor, too sweet to survive? We did. We descended. The heart hauled into dissolve by the same hands that salved it. His, mine, his, ours. Second, the aching inertia, an abiding slope of sorrow that tilts you toward that too familiar edge, saps your spirit, fast as sickness drains a child's flamingo cheeks. Your world framed by a ceaseless dirge, days slinking to a drone of disconnect. This morning, on my bedroom window, I notice the frost, missing, feel colder somehow. Day trips, glacier night touches, your parting lips closing, closed. Thank you very much for having me.
Next up on the podcast today, we have a first-time guest, and a guest that I have the wonderful pleasure of reading with tomorrow night. That's Sunday the 13th of February at 7 p.m. on Zoom, which, thanks to Colin Bancroft, it will be the Poets Directory in connection with the Poetry Society virtual stanza. There will be links to this on how to get your free tickets in the blog post for today, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it later on in the show. But meanwhile, back to today's guest, who is the author of In an Ideal World, I'd Not Be Murdered, published by Against the Grain in 2021, which you will hear poems from shortly. She has been widely published in journals from Under the Radar to Tears in the Fence, and is the creator of Wild Whispers, an international poetry film project, and the co-editor of the online magazine Poetry Film Live, and you'll hear a poem from that at the end of her reading. This is the marvellous Chaucer Cameron.
I'm Chaucer Cameron. I'd like to start by thanking Damien for giving me the wonderful opportunity to read on Eat the Storms podcast. I'm going to read 4 poems taken from my pamphlet, In an Ideal World, I'd Not Be Murdered, which explores the impact of prostitution on the body, in this case, the missing or disappeared bodies. And I will end with a poem that has been adapted into a poetry film by Helen Dewberry, the director of Poetry Film Live. The poem incorporates what I call internal songs, and these songs enable agency and autonomy and offer the characters in my book a way to exit the industry. I don't dispute some sex workers consider they give consent. I don't dispute we feel safer in strip clubs and indoors, that sometimes we feel we've made a choice. I don't dispute that sometimes we enjoy our work, that some of us feel we've provided a therapeutic service. I don't dispute that sometimes we make a lot of money, that sometimes we spend a lot of money. So much money that we don't feel our body wounds, that we don't feel our broken bones. I don't dispute that some of my friends might feel the same way I did then, but I can't be sure. I'd need to ask them, wouldn't I? But I can't do that. Missing. Ellen Green, 1980, discovered hanging in a hallway by her daughter and a punter still adjusting his clothes. Tony Cassidy, 1977, another one under, King's Cross Station, 11 a.m. Fiona, 1978, mule, jailed in Thailand, raped on her release, loses custody of 3 children, disappeared, presumed dead. Joan Adams, 1981, dismissed from Madam's service, fired from the workplace, discovered underwater. Jane Foster, 1979, cut a body from her body, paid the doctor with a promise, wrote a sonnet, died at 30. I do not know the name of the woman who was shot through the windscreen of her car in Church Street near a pub in Dalston. But I can remember thinking, I do remember thinking, I now remember thinking, if I shopped our pimp, I'd die. Hooked. I remember standing on a street corner eating BLT on rye, thinking about my fluid intake. But despite my thirst, despite taboo, I aimed for the 3 crowns. Ordered fruit juice, nearly. It was an ordinary evening, drear, overcast. Outside the traffic was building, diesel fumes circled the inside of my nostrils. Air. I needed it. Exited, or tried to. It was raining, so I called a cab, considered my options bent at the edges. The traffic was static. The traffic eased. The traffic was at a standstill. The traffic flowed nicely. The taxi turned right past Clissold Park to... It had been a long time since I'd been in that part of the city. I remember how quickly evenings turned dark, how my cigarettes slid between seats, how my fingers, not as slim, not as deft as they once were, reached deep into the crease, deep down, hooked. Remember how we used to walk through little streets, snow, broken ice, small torn twigs, mist, open fire, mulled wine, cut glass, smooth stem. Inside this trace of warm we sit, but notice that the stem is chipped. A somewhere place we lived. What time was had back then? Did you catch it? A glimpse through fields, a bob of fluff, a dandelion clock, the breeze.
My next guest today is a writer and poet who said that his finest achievement is being a proud new father to baby Leonardo, who arrived at the beginning of this week. So firstly, a huge welcome to this grand wide world, Leonardo. This father is the author of the poetry collections The Crossing, Vincent and Inheritance, and the novels The Swallows for Linetto and The Dark Horse of Every Wild Thing. Recently, he started a new adventure in literature with a living poem that will evolve on Twitter and is dedicated to his son. And you can follow this and enjoy the poem as it evolves at stars_poem. And of course, there are links to this and everyone else's social media handles and websites in the accompanying blog post over at www.eatthestorms.com. Right now, with the Cider Press Review Book Award and 7 Pushcart Prize nominations among others, I am so delighted to hand you over to Joseph Fasano.
I'm glad to be here sharing poems. I'm going to read 2 short lyric poems and then an excerpt from a new project of mine that I'll describe in a moment. This is called The Moon. I, too, am tired of it, and yet, like an old love, it comes to us, illuminating the bare walls of our houses, catching its hems on our thresholds, carrying its little cup of blossoms. We are done with it. Aren't we done with it? We have told ourselves only grace can change us. We have told ourselves the craft is not the magic. We have told ourselves the myths are in our hands. And yet, Isa wrote to us, and ever, let us walk out to the summer grass and be there. Let us look up through the deepest leaves and open. Let us wait then while the ancient things are woken, because haven't we always been lonely? Haven't we looked up into the wild skies and asked too to be luminous and ruined, and risen like this cold stone in the darkness, and changed in it as radiantly as we can? This is a poem called Wheat Field with Crows, titled after one of Vincent van Gogh's last paintings. Try to remember the seasons when the wind was new, when your hands were good fire in the hands of travelers, when the foliage brushed its music against your body and nothing wasn't music, when your future was the cool air in the garden, and to gather it was to know the losses wholly, like songs composed for one hand in the darkness. Whatever you have opened to at the end's door, try to remember the hours when the sleeper walked unwoken in the night air, when the wild winds rumbled past you in the fall fields, and you blessed them, you surrendered to splendor, when you lifted up your ruins on the old road, and the hard law of the luminous moved through you. Look at it. Look at the wind now. Stand there where you've asked your life to stand. And if love should come, its wool glove on your shoulder, if love should leave you kneeling on the roadway, the bitter wind, the lost flocks rocking by you, kneel there in the dim wind as it sings you. Kneel there as you must have done in your first world, when the wind was wind, when your ruin was a music. You who were no one once, and colder, and were open so wholly to the brokenness that you sang to whatever left you empty, like the cello in the cello maker's hands. Now I hope that anyone who might be listening might indulge me in listening to a work that is very much in progress, and I hope in progress for a considerable amount of time. This is a poem that I'm writing for my son as he makes his way into this world, and hopefully as we grow together. I've decided to do something very unlike anything I've done before in my compositional process, which is to share the poem, one line or several lines at a time, online. And so I'm doing that on Twitter, the veritable wasteland that space can be. And I hope just to share little quiet lines in that space. And hopefully it's a poem that my son, as he grows, will be able to carry with him. So I'll read some lines. The final form of the poem is still very much up in the air, and I think I'll just let it speak for a few moments. You are why I survived. You will be handed someone's absence like a dark harp in your arms. You will have a life to learn to make it sing. You will feel the dead move through you like deer crossing a river in fog. I love the music in you that has not yet sung. I love the little starling of your heart. I love the way you reach for your own shadow like your mother's long black hair. At least from time to time, look up at the stars and say your name. Notice that it doesn't change a thing. Child, I will never say your name except as a question. I will teach the wild doe of your soul to move through the calls of its hunters. I will steady the feral foal of your heart. I will show you music is the proof that chaos is a lie. I will show you people can still share a breath. I will show you men are not the end of tenderness. One day you will have to go into your own wilderness. Already the little fawn of your absence nuzzles me awake each morning. Never forget you can hold yourself in your own arms. Never forget someone held you in the nights simply because you were you. Never forget you are made of stars that were brightest in their failing. Never forget when you hold someone that we really have no names. Child, they will say these lines are aimless, but like your life, they are only for those who can follow. Maybe the moon will leave our lives like someone carrying the brass, dismantled bed you slept in as a child. Maybe what heals us is to begin. Maybe what saves us is to praise. Praise be to your mother, the way she would say to me, kiss me, to taste if there was whiskey on my lips. Praise be to your mother, for she carried you from the far side of the darkness. Child, your gaze is sacred. Child, to say one word of truth in this world is greater than making an empire of lies. I, too, have been a child, listening to coyotes in the darkness. I did not know the song I was afraid of was my own. I have learned we are only as immense as what we surrender. I have learned the dead return to us each year, like antlers we have carried in secret. Child, may you lay your hand on your father's heart like the grave of your childhood horses. I would brush the shadows from your face like the blood of your stolen ponies. I would show you, if you choose to be a man, your life is not a crime. Child, you have saved my life with this song. Where is the great yes of your life? I, too, once stood at the door of the wilds of my life. Go in. Yes to the wild darkness. Yes to those who have carried grief like empty bridles on their shoulders. Yes to those who know that every love is a revolution that can shake the world. Child, who, if not you, will sing the song of your life? Do you want to have a name or quietly touch the truth? I have touched the moon in you like a fawn left in the branches after the floods have come. I have rubbed the moon like horse blood from my father's boots. My life was lost when I stopped giving thanks. Thanks be to cotton and to briar. Thanks be to thirst and to worry. Thanks be to boys' voices breaking like fresh colts in deep snow. Thanks be to birds who abandon what's been touched by human hands. Thanks be to wine that stains our teeth to show our joy. Thanks be to you, child. You who will walk out in your mourning clothes and cradle the face of the great mare. What if you do not even know the great question of your life?
Next up today, we have a poet reading her work in public for the first time, and when you hear her, you may be as shocked as me to discover how brilliantly she delivers. With work previously published in Bad Lilies, Atrium, Dear Reader, she is a writer, musician, crafter, and the head of English, media and film at a school in London. Taking a moment from lecturing at the Shakespeare Institute, the British Film Institute, being on the committee for the London Association of Teaching English, and from writing her first poetry collection, I am so happy to be able to hand you over to the bloody excellent Galia.
Hey folks, I'm Galia, and I'd like to start by thanking Damien for inviting me on to Eat the Storms. This podcast is all kinds of wonderful, and I'm so excited to be sharing my poems in this episode. The first poem I'm going to read was published by Dear Reader last year. It's called Bubba and Zayda, the Yiddish for grandmother and grandfather. Bubba and Zayda. They would have done anything for the privilege of dying without passports, to know that their armchairs and vases would exist, to be used by their great-great-grandchildren. Once I sulked that Sufder's wedding dress from the photograph wasn't kept for me, a child simply misunderstanding how things were never left behind out of spite. I cherish the photographs now, threadbare sepia moments of lives I will never truly know. Sometimes I put on Aunt Polly's black velvet cape and feel held through the generations by its warmth. And I cried when I hung the mezuzah on the door of my first home, knowing I could stay as long as I chose. So I'm a teacher, and a few years ago I taught a class that, although I was very proud to see graduate, I was really sad to see go. As a leaving gift, I wanted to write them this poem, which was featured as part of the Poetry for Good competition, a national competition to celebrate the UK's many key workers and the hard work that they do, often unseen. The poem is called Conclude, Verb. The tales of school ties, the dreams and hopes of a ripened mass, fathom blue, yellow and emerald stripes, strobe in the wind, wave farewell for the final time, whip gleefully through the school gates and out into the concrete world. A rushing sea of tear-soaked blazer sleeves, muffled cries and shoulder pads race towards futures not yet mused, punctuate the air like bird song. I break away from the crowds, intending to return to school's heart, but there, discarded on the pavement, a lone tie flounders, flaps its last like a fish gasping for air, facing a fate it never knew it had. I approach slowly, step following step, and see for the first time that I know this article, and remember with warmth the first time we locked eyes, and stopped it in the corridor to share a morning greeting, and gave it a late detention, and sent it home with a note, all threadbare edges and ragged expectations. Once I saw it crying alone near the back gate, sibilant sniffs, single sloping tears, masked by the cheers of goals and 15-minute freedoms, struggling desperately to remain unnoticed. I moved along that day and kept a distance. Should I have paused? I saw the smile, pullulated the joy that resonated when I returned a marked paper, filled with gold dust and branded with gold stars. But now the wind begins to settle, and the tie rests discarded on the cracked, coarse ground. Where is the neck that proudly wore it now? I take a final glance, turn and press back a few paces, determined to find my way back to the snug for respite. Ties may be discarded, but dreams and hopes are not confined to schools, to uniforms, to silver clips on white collars, to anything. Staying in school now, but taking a massive tonal shift. This spicy little poem was published by Atrium in November last year. Falling in love with a second PE teacher was reckless, because the first one was just careless, harmless, futureless. And although you missed your friend's wedding because your nose was broken and your face, head and pride were swollen after a night of cracking and cokes and unprotected, unpunctuated sex, you can probably write it off as life experience. This next poem, called Barnaby, is a micropoem, which I hope serves as a reminder for all of us who are missing parties at the moment that we might be better off at home. And I think it's an IPA or maybe a Pilsner, he said, and it was evident from the trailing off of his voice that we were having one of the most boring conversations at the party. So that last poem was published by Bad Lilies in their 5th issue, Decemberists, at the end of last year. It was part of a trio of poems which I'll complete reading now. Immediately after and then later. 1. His leaving was a psalm, an emptiness of words ringing out in the silence of the hallway. I begged, of course, knowing I was racing toward a life without. 2. I think of it as a tree. Oversized duvet edges hang like willows, a sheet rooted into the frame, and the night's dense air a canopy. It is unbodied. It exists unpeopled, but not unpleasured, and all the empty is empty to be cherished. 3. When it is really gone in a supposed-to-be-there place, there is acceptance. Nothing cracks, everything unmoving. All sound has melody, or at least purpose. 4. I don't miss you, but when they ask about my love life, I shrug and say it's terminal. It is better to have loved and lost is horse shit, when almost 8 years pass and a whisper of Davidoff cool water from a passerby on the high street levels me. The list of baby names, crafted after Daniel and Laura made Pearl, unused, is barely concealed between to-do lists on the notes app in my phone. I catch a glimpse and collapse on the kitchen floor. And don't even get me started on the photo album, Vegas Sans wedding, veiled in a Sainsbury's plastic bag at the back of the coat cupboard. I'm going to finish my reading today with another poem that was published by Dear Reader last year. I'm currently working on my first collection, which, among other things, explores the concept of imagined and parasocial relationships. This poem will hopefully be a part of that collection. At night, he smiles, or I smile for him in shadows of the flat, living his invisible man life, the only real pretend friend I've had. A womb-warm throb weighing in heavy, a moth against a well-lit window, a flash in the corner of an eye. His low, slow night voice lullabying, his mind, but really mine, susurrations. I'm so content I feel sick, reaching out for his body, which has never been there. So thanks everyone for listening, and thank you again to Damien for inviting me. If you want to hear what I'm up to, you can follow me on Twitter at Galia Melon, and I hope I can eat the storms with you guys again someday soon. Thank you.
My final guest on the show today I had the honour of introducing to a Zoom room recently while playing host to Margaret Royal for the launch of her poetry collection Immersed in Blue. This guest has been shortlisted for the Bridport Prize, longlisted in Dyslexia Poetry Competition and selected for the Urbaci Prize to be one of their featured poets. I am also very excited as a devout fan of baking and a huge fan of the Great British Bake Off that I can welcome to Storms its very first Bake Off poem. Mixed in with today's bowl of poetic bakes will be poems from her debut pamphlet How Not to Multitask, published last year by Wild Press Books, which she is about to tell you more about. I am so pleased to welcome to Eat the Storms, Jo Weston.
Hi everyone, just want to say thank you to Damien for inviting me to read on Eat the Storms podcast. I'm going to start with my most recently published poem, which was published in the Writing Knots 2021 Anthology of Nottinghamshire Poetry, which is edited by Teo Eve. And the poem is about the area where I live, and it's called Welcome to Sherwood. On shiny days, parasols open, drawing dog owners, male friends, multi-generations. Pedestrians with bags sway in and out of conversations on work, money, a relative's health. Earthenware clinks are drowned by vehicle rumblings, distracting eyes from window exhibitions. Figures pass in doorways of bakeries, faux butchers, are reminded to shop, socialise, relax by street art at the lights. Until statues of robins umpire the nightly relay, tables on pavements exchanged for enticing aromas. Shirts and dresses replace shorts, flow through cumin, garlic, oregano clouds. Later, from pillar box to bus station for drinks, until snacks from the post office for home, a stone's throw away from here. The next poem I've selected is a political one, which I thought was very in keeping with the current times. It was a poetry commission by Derby Theatre for Derby Poetry Festival in October last year. It's called Levelling Up. Some have the fitness to achieve anything. Others have obstacles to getting the same. Some have lives of freedom and money. Others are left juggling just to stay sane. Some boost their confidence through job opportunities. Others must take sick leave, then lose their work. Some collect houses, cars, children. Others gather feelings of shame, hurt. When some see that others' lives could play out differently, and remove the obstacles that prevent success. Others see hope, opportunity, to develop experience, confidence, wealth. When some see the benefits of everyone thriving, others see a chance to be part of the game. When some see the benefits of taking out obstacles, we'll know that we're equal, not the same. So next it's the other poem that I wrote for Derby Theatre, which is inspired by a TV programme which was on recently, and we're probably all missing now in the sort of dark cold of January, and that's Bake Off. So this poem is called To the Gods of Bake Off, in honour of the Great British Bake Off. Instead of creaming butter, help me pace my energy. Instead of adding sugar, mix in views that make me think. Instead of sifting flour, let me separate the negatives. Instead of drops of essence, release ideas that I can link. Instead of beating eggs, crack me open to new concepts. Instead of oven baking, raise me up from hidden depths. Instead of cooling on a worktop, chill me out in life's adversities. No need for a cake tin, just keep my mind fresh. Instead of grand showstoppers, let me shine in all the small things. Instead of beige aprons, make it not matter how I dress. Instead of using kitchen aids, let people help each other. Instead of just one winner, enable all to taste success. So for the second half of my reading, I'm going to share some poems from my poetry pamphlet, which is called How Not to Multitask and is published by Wild Press Books. The first poem I'm going to read is called Neighbourhood Watch. Opening my old drawer, that smell seeps through me. A towel hung out to flap in a southern breeze, sweet scent, a comforting embrace after difficult days, in a house always warm, always quiet, in which I could not be myself. The second poem I'm going to read was first published in the Abachi Poetry Journal in issue 61, after I was selected in the Abachi Prize 2018 to be a featured poet. It's called Single Ticket. As I leave the stop at the Cities General to take my seat, I'm introduced through implements designed to hide to the half-eaten sounds of a song by Snap, vibrating from the head of a man by the staircase, while behind me a figure who used to swing with her mother cheek to cheek now moans to her forbearing friend of how late today's post arrives, and a group with a common interest in genetics debate across the back seat where science will be in 10 years' time, as a teenager engages his 2-year-old with a pointed finger and excited "Look!" And I, still clutching my appointment letter, hear nothing but one line from the headphones of the man by the stairs in the song called Rhythm is a Dancer. So my penultimate poem for this podcast is also from the pamphlet, and it was first published in the Pandemic Poetry Anthology, which was edited by Ziggy Dix and published by Yarn Whispering. It's called A Dream While Social Distancing. Summer sun dapples through treetops of birch and pine. Damp rises from the mossy floor. In the clearing ahead, groups of daisies. Amongst them, my mum, stoic in boots and floppy hat, grasps a walking stick. I reach her as she stretches an arm around my waist and says softly, "All right?" We set off, weaving through trunks and over rocks, our footsteps softened by dead pine needles. A sunlit field glows up ahead. Before I read my last poem, I thought I'd just give you a bit more information on how not to multitask. I started writing it a few years ago, and the theme that sort of brought it all together came about during the pandemic. So if I just read you the back cover, just to give you an idea. How Not to Multitask explores the difficulty of juggling issues in normal life with those which occur in extenuating circumstances, and the struggle to combine these into a new perspective. Everyday challenges around home, relationships and nature interweave with those caused by chronic illness, cancer and issues around mental health. These poems will appeal not only to people with experience of serious or long-term illness, but to anyone who's wrestled with old and new normals. So I hope that gives you a bit more of an idea. You can also find out more on Wild Press Books website or on my website. You can follow me on Twitter at JOWESTN, so not the second O, because that's a basketball player. And you can also contact me on Instagram, Jo Weston 520. And you can buy the book on Amazon or get a print copy from Five Leaves Bookshop, which is a brilliant independent bookshop in Nottingham. So thank you for listening so far, and here's my last poem for now, which is called Gran. When I was 2, my mother, in bed ill, thought the house had gone too quiet. She found me piling coal on a roaring fire and swept me away. You were meant to keep an eye on me. I didn't mind. When I was 12, I visited you in the flat on a hill, with the piano at the top of the staircase, and a sharp wind shooting under the doors. You only had lemon squash in, not the drinks children like. I didn't mind. When I was 20, I came to see you in my holidays. You'd forgotten that I was at uni, striding through yet another new flat with your perfect hair and stylish clothes. I didn't mind. When I was 31, I saw you in your last little room with plastic flowers. You smiled, first at my mum, then at me, and said, "Have you two met?" I had to leave the room. I hope you didn't mind.
Thank you so much, Jo. Now, Jo was, as I said, my last guest on the podcast today, so that leaves me, as usual, with just enough time to leave you a few poems before we say goodbye. The poems that I've chosen to read today are, for one reason or another, poems that haven't quite made it into the collection that I'm working on at the moment, Back From Away. Tales of being back here in Ireland while triggered by memories of being away for the past 23 years in Paris, London and Amsterdam. These poems, perhaps because of duplication of ideas, haven't made it into the collection, but they are still poems that I'm quite fond of. The first one is called A Black Canvas. Mum tells of no moon tonight, as if it's been lost. As if the darkness will never rise and the sun will weep at that thought. We cut down an apple tree in the shadow of the front garden yesterday, but left the root to remind it, perhaps, of how to return. Should I have done the same for the moon? Left a card of remembrance for its fine form. White blemish on the canvas of that all-consuming blackness. I never liked starting out on white, or pivoting my position on a plan. Far too much pressure on the pinning down. and where to place the blemish of the first brushstroke. But black is where you paint a Pollock. This next poem is set in Tunis, which I first visited for work when I was living in Amsterdam, and this is called At the Rising Sun. Sandy shades of dust speckle ground, from where the scent of olives ooze, mix with the blossom of orange, distant Morocco, and the stench of burnt tire. Driven by blind taxi driver at dusk, on a road stretching along the coast where seagulls scout for food under surface sway, a dance in the setting light. Next morning, I wake to white tile of blue stripe, stroll over coals of sand, watch tide river across my feet and see white-robed men fold eyes inward and welcome morning's prayer. When the sun finally rises, its fingers run soft across the tombs of those no longer subjected to the savagery of gulls, whose shadows sweep the same way across the world at rise and fall of day. This next poem, while still on the theme of the collection, although it won't be published in it, is a poem that I wrote just yesterday while walking around the ghosts of inner city Dublin. It's inspired by Joni Mitchell's song Clouds. This is called Clouds Illusions. 1. Lyric. I've looked at life from both sides now. 2. Observation. You trained as a butcher, cutting into death to see how it lived, in place of opening up to a life before death found its way out. 3. Fact. I could barely see over the walls at 5. No taller than those pigs your brother kept in city sty, fattening bellies between compress of concrete. 4. Reality. Gone now, ground down by conglomerates. Skyscrapers rise in Smithfield, cast shadows over Met centres. There'll always be cracks. 5. Curiosity. Google retraced your tracks today, where they paved over pigs but left the parade of your altar boy days, running home with coin to a mother you later avoided, while she filled my pockets with all the coins that your devotion was too much to believe. There is more than one way to bring home the bacon. 6. Revelation. Behind the house, no longer hers or yours, and whitewashed away from any attachment to me. I watched the College of Surgeons leaning, and wondered if playing the butcher was as close as you got to being a doctor back then. If coins meant I love you, like that 5 quid you stuffed in my fist for sweets when I said I was gay. And if life, love, and all the clouds, when seen from other sides, make it any easier to swallow, the portions sliced across our individual plates. And finally, this last poem is called Limitation of Roses. When I was a child, I grew up in a house that had 3 bedrooms. My parents had one, I had the other, which was the back room and the biggest room. But for some reason, every summer, I packed my bags and moved into the small box room in the front of the house. Limitation of Roses. I had the biggest bedroom as a boy, but curiosity took holidays in the box room, at the lighter end of the landing for every summer's short sojourn. Even at 12, I was already practicing packing. Bigger room was backside, garden view of roses, suffocating in bordered beds and all the threats from their thorns that never clocked the clippers that served the brown vase of the sitting room. The box room was front-facing, and in the sweat of summer nights, I dreamt about being burnt. Dreams that stretched further than those bordered roses that never made it beyond the brown vase of the sitting room where we rarely entertained. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, men and women, non-conformers and non-believers, gender X and gender equals, we've reached the end of another episode of Eat the Storms, the Poetry Podcast. My name is Damien B Donnelly and I've been your host and producer today, and I would like to say a huge thank you to all of you for tuning in, whether it's been on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Radio Public, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts or iTunes. And as always, an exceptional thank you to my guest stars today. They have been David Hanlon, Chaucer Cameron, Galia, Joseph Fasano and Baby Leonardo, and Jo Weston. As I said at the beginning of the show, for details on how to find, follow and support my guests, please head on over to www.eatthestorms.com, click on the podcast section, and there you'll find a blog post for every episode. This was episode 11, season 4. Also, as I said at the top of the show, we will be back with you again on Monday, the 14th of February at 8 p.m. this time for the now traditional Valentine's episode, although this time, along with some love poems, we will have breakup poems, poems for inanimate objects, love poems for cities, friends, and what Valentine's episode will be complete without a love poem for a goldfish. So that's this Monday at 8 p.m. on your preferred podcast platform. Now, just before that, on Sunday at 7 p.m, that is Sunday the 13th of February, on Zoom, the Poets Directory in connection with the Poetry Society Virtual Stanza will be taking place with their February reading. Tickets are free and currently available at Eventbrite, and the poets will be, as you've heard today, Chaucer Cameron, Pascal Petit, Rory Waterman, Julie Meller and myself, with huge thanks to Colin Bancroft from the Poetry Directory for organising this event. So join us for an hour and a half this Sunday, the 13th of February at 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Okay, that's all we've got time to share with you today. So for me here in Dublin, with the gentle sea breeze blowing in the window, I wish you all a bright and breezy rest of the weekend, start of the week, or meander through the midweek, depending on when you've actually tuned into this podcast. See you for Valentine's on Monday at 8 p.m. and then again the following Saturday at 5 p.m. for more poetry that ensures that you stay bloody poetic.